So, welcome back. We are doing part 2 of episode 3, our first episode in our 90 series. I have no clue what I'm gonna, have this title be numbered, so I apologize ahead of time. I will figure that out. And we are back, and we're gonna talk about the late 90s. We talked a little bit about the early 90s in part 1, so part 2 we're gonna talk about something that I'm more familiar with, seeing that I'm probably one of the younger people here. So...
yes.
What's on our itinerary? Let's start.
All right, so here's what we got. So, with the late 90s, what was neat about it is we saw 3D gaming break in. So we've just gone from 16-bit 2D, and we're busting into 3D. So we've got the PlayStation, Nintendo 64, and somehow the Sega CD.
Let's recognize also that there was some three-dimensional processing done on Super Nintendo.
That is true. Late Star Fox 2.
Yeah.
I know Star Fox 2, which was not released until the Nintendo.
No, the original Star Fox is the same exact way. It looked just like Star Fox 64 with heavy polygons.
Yep.
And then somehow some wizard was like, "Dude, we can run Doom on the Super Nintendo. Let's go!" We're like, all right, whatever. So there is a Doom build for Super Nintendo.
But Doom doesn't use polygons in a traditional sense.
Ish.
Yeah, it still
step.
appears 3D. Yes, it still appears 3D, so it doesn't matter. Continue. I'm sorry. I just wanted to recognize Super Nintendo.
We got the PlayStation. So we're talking about 64-bit, which was how 3D comes in, 64-bit processors. And so we're going in.
PlayStation's 32-bit.
32-bit. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So 64 was 64-bit. PlayStation's 32-bit. But here's what's neat though. With the exception of Nintendo, Sony introduced CD-ROMs. So CD-ROMs were now being used. And Sony CD-ROMs were a bit different. They had the black bottoms to them. They were kind of a specific format. They weren't like the actual CDs you would buy from Music Core, for those that don't know. And Nintendo stuck with cartridges, and Sega also had CDs with their Sega CD. I mean, if they didn't and they called their console Sega CD, I feel like that'd be kind of dumb.
False advertising.
Yeah, false advertising. Yes, we could still do false advertising. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, it's Sega CD cartridge drive.
Yeah.
There you go.
Now with 3D, this was neat. This is kind of where I went from 8-bit to 3D. So this was freaking mind blowing to me.
I'm sure.
To see three-dimensional environments because I skipped the 16-bit era. So as someone who first experienced, I was like, oh my god, you see the details, the polygons, the worlds. You start to kind of see trees and stuff. And I mean, if you look at it today, it's definitely
like you look back and we make fun of Squall for being the most handsome man in the room, and it's just a blob of pixels.
He still was. I don't care what anybody says. I still agree with the original Renoa statement.
You're the most handsome man in the room.
I remember playing. I think it was the dancing scene from 8.
That's what we're talking about.
Okay, yeah, and I remember playing that for my friends and being like, "This is amazing. This is
is
so
a movie.
realistic." Yeah.
Oh man,
this could be
the
real
Final
people.
Fantasy games really showed me the capability of gaming, how
Oh yeah, definitely.
it just blew my mind.
I
how
also
it's
like
just
to-
different
I
as
like-
compared to Sonic and Mario.
Yeah, totally.
So
I like to
wanna-
recognize. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Continue. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's something to build off of something you said earlier. Is they mentioned the 64-bit, and then you reiterated that Sony is actually the PS1's a 32-bit console. But if you ask anybody who doesn't actually know that, whether N64 or PlayStation 1 had better graphics, people are almost always automatically going to say PlayStation 1. And the reason is because despite the fact that the hardware of the N64 is so much better, a CD made it so Sony didn't have to compress files the way they did in our cartridge, which is why is one of the main speculations that Square Enix decided 7 should be a PlayStation game.
Yeah.
Because they were allowed to do uncompressed, pre-rendered cutscenes, despite the fact that Cloud as a polygon looks disgustingly ugly and Mario looks gorgeous. I think that's a person. I don't know. It's got a yellow French fry on its head.
I used to call them Legos.
Hey, but I want to give Square some credit because the reason that Final Fantasy VII looked several teams that weren't communicating with each other, but this was their first foray into 3D, and they had no idea that texture mapping was possible on PlayStation. So what you're getting is pixels laid over a polygon, but there's not actual texture mapping on any of the characters. That's why they're just the chests and stuff open. The characters themselves are all just a single colored polygon. There's no actual textures on them. And that's why 8 is so drastically different from 7, was because by that time, Square learned that you could texture map onto 3D surfaces with the PlayStation on a much larger scale. And so Final Fantasy VII was an unfortunately... That was their experiment, really.
Another thing about 7 is 7 started as a Super Nintendo game built with the Final Fantasy VI engine.
Yes.
This picture right here.
That's so funny. I always wondered why they were just so bad. They're not that far apart, so I always wondered why it was
that
so
updated model
different.
of Locke from 6 is actually what Cloud started as.
Yes, and in fact, to begin making Final Fantasy VII, the team started by making Final Fantasy VI in 3D. And they actually, you can go online and see some of the, I think it's just screenshots, I don't think there's any video. But you can see screenshots of the original Final Fantasy VI battle in 3D, and the characters look exactly like the characters from Final Fantasy VII. Big block, square, Legos. That's the best way to put it, Legos. Yeah.
Imagine, like, what a Final Fantasy VII game, what it would look like if they had, like, kept that path. Like,
yeah.
Just trying to
I might have to make this in Dreams. Oh, great, another 7 million hour project.
Man, you're committing to a lot of projects there. You've got a Carrot project, Final Fantasy VII, and a Tomb Raider. You're taking.
I forgot about carrots.
Yes, the carrots is most important. That actually needs to
Yeah,
go
it is.
But from a hardware perspective, too, there's so many other things besides just CDs. But the CDs created another problem that it created a problem, even though it was a solution. A CD made it so that they couldn't have internal saves. Right. So they had to have an external memory unit. So that's how we got the invention of the memory card. It's the same thing with the N64 card. They found out it was cheaper to have a rewritable memory card for games that needed a bigger save than it was to put one in every cartridge.
Memory cards weren't cheap, right?
No. I had this discussion with, was it Matt, where nobody actually had, no, I forget who it was on Twitter. Nobody had the first party Nintendo memory card because it was so goddamn expensive. It was like $50. Everybody had the generic one with the red label that was from like Blockbuster.
And going back to what you were saying about graphics compared a 32-bit PS1, and most people will say that the graphics are better, is because despite the fact that there was no anti-aliasing on PS1 and games look really, really jagged as a result, they're crystal clear in their jaggedness compared to an N64 game, which is the only console which had forced anti-aliasing. And the solution was to alias the entire screen as a single unit, and so the entire... What you were seeing on the screen was a blurred version of what the N64 was actually processing. So every single game came out looking really blurry, and that's why. Is because there was an anti-aliasing solution being done on our hardware level automatically.
Okay. Now we have...
Which made the games look worse, unfortunately.
Yeah. So we have all these varieties of them, and they make them, and, we're seeing kind of more open worlds and the ability to really do some exploration. That's going to bring us in kind of... to the next is because we kind of just covered we have 3D platformers and puzzle games. This is kind of where the rise went because they had space to do exploration now. 16-bit was you had overworlds and stuff like that, and you could do little dungeons, but this was like 3D immersing into it, and
2D was largely just scrolling. 3D was where we can go anywhere.
Exactly.
We can go anywhere.
Mario
Nintendo comes out with Nintendo comes out with Super Mario 64 in 1996, and let's be honest, that blew everybody away at the time it came out. Critically acclaimed, everything. I mean, it was neat. Mario is going around. You have Princess Peach's castle. You have all these little mini hub open worlds.
By far, I think my favorite Mario game was Mario 64.
I will die on the hill that game controls like a friggin' dream. I love the controls in that game. And you know what? People will insist that Mario Odyssey doesn't play. Yes, it does. You're just playing Mario 64 again. And you just hate Mario 64's controls because they were the first version of that. But they were so amazing. They were so good.
The camera has not aged as well.
No, nothing has aged well about the game. I mean, it's still a really enjoyable game.
Oh, it's fun. It's still fun as hell, but let's be honest, it didn't age as well as we had hoped.
It's frustrating. And back then it was like Mario's always been hard, and now it's like, man, this is not the pinnacle of game design. It's hard because the camera doesn't work and Mario doesn't work, but again,
Yes. Now
I
we
love
have,
the controls,
in
so.
addition to that, though, we also had the creation, and this is the same freaking year, too. So we get Super Mario 64 in the same year, but then we got another title that was actually largely unknown until it was revealed at E3 that same year. And that's Tomb Raider. So Core Design had been developing this crazy puzzle platformer, 3D whole thing with Tomb Raider, and like nobody hardly knew about it until it was like announced. And everybody wanted it, and it went crazy. And it became, Matt and I is one of our favorite franchises. Both of us spent countless hours in our youth, and still to this day, playing them. But it was different. And Lara was built, with the polygons and the joke with the triangle titties and all that. And they couldn't even do her. They couldn't even give her the full ponytail. She looked like she has a little bun on her hair in the.
She has a
game.
bun. Yeah, she rolled it into a bun.
Yeah, and but it was neat. You had these like tombs, and you had these interesting environments. You had snow, levers, interaction, all these puzzles. The
vertical movement.
Yes, vertical movement, CGI cutscenes. It was.
Yeah.
She could backflip, sidestep. She could shoot things. She could do all this crazy stuff, and it was kind of the beginning of tank controls too. But the tank controls for it aren't bad.
No.
And they still function pretty well compared to some other tank control games.
Yeah.
But you had these really beautiful environments at the time. They really focused on making these tombs unique designs and
realistic, as real as it could be.
Yeah, it all kind of came in, and you really thought you were exploring ancient Greece, Peru, all of that.
Yeah.
And it had a narrative too, which was neat. They did CGI cutscenes to set up the narrative and different aspects of it.
And you know what's crazy? In remaking that game, I am working with Jennifer Millward, who does the audiobooks for the Angel of Darkness Tomb Raider series, did the voice of Lara Croft and all the cutscenes for me for Dreams.
Oh, wow, that is really nice.
Nice.
Yeah, so all the grunts and stuff that you hear are Jenny Millward doing Lara Croft.
That's dope.
And there's only 14 minutes of cutscenes in that game to push the entire narrative.
And that's crazy to think about that too, because as a kid you think there's so much more, but replaying them as an adult, you realize there's not.
And that includes dead air, so there's really only like 7 total minutes of dialogue in the entire game.
Which is
I think it's
crazy.
super interesting that I feel like games then required a lot more imagination of putting things together than they do now, like because there was so little actual like story progression, like with Tomb Raider,
right?
So you kind of had to pull on that.
Do you think that part of that is maybe because we didn't have any way to if you got Tomb Raider, there was really nothing else released around it. So you really focused on Tomb Raider. Nowadays there's 10 games released a month so that you want to play. So do you think that's maybe because we had forced ourselves to get more immersed? We didn't have other games to play, and so when I was playing Tomb Raider, I would go, and learn them as much as I could about Peru and the city of Vilcabamba, and whatever I came across in Tomb Raider, I would purposefully immerse myself in because there was nothing else to immerse myself in. Does that make sense?
I would like to say too that we were a lot younger then too. A lot of us have a lot more priorities now, such as work, kids, family, and all of that. So I can see that being a thing as well.
That's true.
And it's why we have to like force ourselves to go super fast. Like I dread playing a new 40-hour game.
Yeah.
I dread that.
It's one thing that I think of too is they were much like the idea of like nobody had a 3D game yet, right? Like we didn't have targeting systems until Ocarina of Time decided we needed one, right?
Right.
So everything was generated by a need. There's no catalyst for these people to go on for a narrative in a video game. Go back and look at like even like if you think about it, Final Fantasy, like let's say like Final Fantasy 4, Final Fantasy 6, right? Even before the 3D, storytelling was in there, but it was still just dialogue boxes, right? There was very little cutscenes, and the same thing with anything. Driving a story in a video game without having the idea of how to do it is really, really hard. Think about like I don't know if anybody had ever played older Shin Megami Tensei titles, right? They are too story driven for the technology. That stuff they wanted to do stuff that needed 3D imaging, which is why Persona 5 is so popular now, is because they can do the whole cinematic experience. But they wanted to do that back then. It doesn't work. So they have to try and create a narrative that works and keeps the player engaged while still dealing with the limits of technology. And there was no catalyst, so they kind of just sticking things and throwing to the wall. Look at what they did with the first 3 Resident Evil games, right?
Yeah.
They made just a little cutscenes with no dialogue in them for the most part. The no voiceovers, just like in 7, where it's just a text box on the bottom, or like white subtitles of what Sephiroth was saying or whatever. And that's what we had for story, because that's the best they could do at the time with the technology.
So do you think because we read it, we had to read so much, that was additionally immersive versus watching somebody do a flip?
It's like it's like when they tell you, like, how do you teach a kid how to do his multiplication tables? Right? You have them sit there and write them out over and over again.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. You're reading it back, right? If you sit there and you read something you wrote down, you're going to withhold it better. You watch it as a cutscene, maybe it gives you a feel and the goosebumps, and it sticks with you for one reason or another, because maybe you like the music. But it doesn't ingrain into you the story when you have to read all of it.
Exactly.
You read all of it, you remember more.
I'm going to add a point to that, because I think you make a very good point. I remember, and this is because I've been replaying all the OG Tomb Raiders recently. And here's what I noticed. So the first one, you kind of you actually get an actual setup for the game, by the way. You know what Lara is going after, and you immerse yourself in the world after that. But I noticed 2, 3, and 3, if you play them, they don't give you nothing. They don't give you anything. You get a quick CJ, she's jumping in it. You don't even know what she's after. You don't even care.
Well, you don't until that, and that's kind of what made them so. You didn't know what you were after until about a level or 2 in, and then all of a sudden you were introduced to not only the expanse that, like in part 3, for example, when Lara goes after the Infata Stone, she didn't know until she met that Scottish dude that there was more to this stone, that it came from some meteorite. So you were really just on this tiny mini adventure Lara was going on to get this tiny stone that turned into something more, and you have to get to the narrative. And I think 2 and 3 both kind of did that.
Well, no, they did. And what my point of it being is that we didn't worry about that as much because they could establish it later. Like, we were excited with jumping into Tomb Raider 2 as a kid. It's like, I don't even care. It's Tomb Raider. I'm excited.
Right. I think having a franchise name was very important back in the 90s. Like having Final Fantasy or like Spyro or Crash or like anything.
Yeah, I agree. And so the point I'm making for this one is, as a kid and stuff, you didn't have to worry about that in the 90s because it was simpler. But when you go back and play them as an adult, and you see how narratives have progressed and all the backgrounds and stuff. I remember going back to Tomb Raider 2 and 3, and I'd be like, oh yeah, they don't even actually tell you why she's doing this or why she's going after a dagger or
something just came into my mind too, thinking about it. A lot of the story stuff, right, is like is almost optional, right? Like think of something like Super Metroid or Mega Man X, right? What's the story behind that? I know, you went and did the research. But if you think about it, right, you don't know anything about Samus or Mega Man or Zero or any of those characters in those games unless you read the manual. Otherwise, you turn the game on, you're a shooting robot. Go have fun.
Oh yeah, I played. I don't know if you guys have played it or anything, but it was on Sega called Vector Man.
Vector Man.
Yes.
I still don't even really know what it was about.
What was it?
I just
Robot.
You're in space shooting aliens.
You're made of balls.
You're made of 3D balls. That's all I cared about. It was cool.
You're a robot and you shoot aliens.
Yep.
But I think we look at it though as the 90s were focused on gameplay. We could immerse ourselves in a gameplay and we didn't care about the story because we were basking in these different environments and we were just having fun. Like, Nintendo never needs to write a story for Mario because it's the same damn thing every time. We know Pete got captured. Let me go play with the levels. It's all about levels.
If you wanted a story, you played an RPG.
In a nutshell, right?
Pretty much that was all you had.
If I was a developer in the 90s making a video game, I'd be afraid to make it too story-driven because I would scare the players away.
Yeah.
So,
totally.
if anything, the lore in video games in the 90s is pretty much optional.
Yeah.
Exactly, because you don't have to get attached to it. Some of them were deeper than others, but you realize with Tomb Raider back in the 90s, it didn't matter if you had this extensive dialogue. And I go back when I've been, we've been enriched with narratives for everything now. Obviously, we know Sony has gone full narrative focused for all their first-party games for the most part. And I go back and I look at these Tomb Raider games and I'm like, God, I want to know more. Like, I was like, man, I wish that we could have a fleshed out remake of these. Like, I really wanted to know the extensiveness to it because it wasn't the same. But I'm like, as a kid, I didn't care about that.
The appeal of remakes of games from the 90s, too, is the fact that they didn't give us all this information. And now the younger generation who relies on having more information, like some Gen Y, kind of folks. Yeah, like
We're just really spoiled.
But to be fair, it was in the magic of a narrative that I finally discovered. So basically, as much as I love Tomb Raider to death, and Lara Croft is my queen and mother, no matter what, Final Fantasy VII is still my favorite game because it was the first game that smacked me in the face and said, you're an adult and you're going to play adult games and this is a story and you're going to get into a story and you're going to learn about these people and you're going to get sad and you're going to love these people and you're going to think about them throughout the rest of your day. And though I always thought about Lara Croft, she was always in my head, I never really had more than she was an aristocrat that got in a plane crash and became a Tomb Raider and wrote books. That's really all I got about her. And I love her to death and her drive.
Right.
But Final Fantasy VII, it was like, I have to know everything about everything. Why is that thing sideways? What happened? What is this reactor? What is this old reactor? Everything mattered suddenly to me.
And I think that's going to bring us into our next topic with this is the pinnacle of RPGs. So, we saw a lot of, 3D platformers, puzzles. Obviously, some that we didn't get to mention are, Spyro, Crash, Klonoa. I will throw Klonoa and die on that hill.
Klonoa.
Anyway,
Spyro
so there was
so important, but we'll talk about that in our.
I know. I'm not going to go on a tangent about it.
We're gonna talk about. We have 3 other episodes on the 90s that we're doing, so we're gonna do our next episode's early games and all that, and then all about the early 90s, and we're gonna do the late 90s, and then we're gonna do an episode about games. So we're just touching on the main important points right now to go back later and go and draw out, this is what we were talking about in our overview episode.
So we're gonna see a really big in-depth as the different parts. Yes, we're just breaking out some generics here today, and we did get into some specifics of some things, but we'll dive really deep.
And we love feedback too, so hopefully we get some feedback before our next episode about what you guys would like to see as well.
Yes. So
feed us back.
Anyway, back to Pinnacle of RPGs. So Pinnacle of RPGs. So I think Matt was describing the investment of Final Fantasy VII. So Final Fantasy VII, I think, broke into the pinnacle of RPGs.
But there were a lot of different RPGs too in the late 90s.
There were,
so
and there were great stories.
Tactics came out around 7, and Final Fantasy Tactics, and it was always downplayed by Final Fantasy VII, and I felt so bad because it's such a good game, and 8 came right after 7, so I get it. 7's the big deal, but there's so many other Tales of Destiny.
Absolutely.
But
again, like we were saying earlier, 7 kind of was the one that everybody got.
Yes, right. Final Fantasy VII was the first 3D Final Fantasy game, and it got a lot of new people on the board.
Right.
And basically, it sold a crap ton. It made the series mainstream at that point. That was the one, and there's a historical significance to that, and that's why a lot of people have the touch to it that people experience. For many of us.
The gateway drug to RPGs.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It was the gateway drug to story-driven gaming to me.
There's a lot of other ones too, like Legend of Mana. That was
Mm-hmm.
So interestingly enough, one of the I talked about one of them about how the rendering of the cutscenes and the non-compression of data made it easier to develop on the PlayStation as a whole. But development costs on the PlayStation, were everything in the 90s. If you couldn't afford to make the game, how are you going to make the game? So one of the problems is how Nintendo does things in their architecture is way less open. It's like Apple versus Android, right? Mm-hmm. And in the 90s, it was a big deal because developing a game for the PlayStation was cheaper as a whole. Not to mention that, that stupid seal of quality. I have a copy of Majora's Mask right here on my desk. Yeah, it's got the Nintendo seal of quality, right? Even on Nintendo non-first party stuff. That was a licensing fee that Nintendo charged people. I know. Sony wasn't charging anything. They just wanted a cut of the profits. Yeah. So if you were developing a game, you weren't sure if you were going to hit the market, especially if you were in Japan. Sony was the way to go, especially with something as a high development cost as an RPG. So that made story-driven, long dev cycle games like RPGs a haven on the PlayStation 1.
Yeah, because I don't think there's nearly as many RPGs.
I can only think of Quest 64 and Ogre Tactics on 64. That's it.
What?
Quest 64 and Ogre Tactics are the only true RPG, JRPGs that I can think of that are on the 64. Everything else in that area time frame is PS1.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and I mean, Sony was the JRPG machine of the late '90s, whereas Nintendo obviously dominated the early.
They still are the.
Yes, Sony is the JRPG king now, whereas Nintendo started as the JRPG king. You know, they got pretty much every JRPG. With the original Nintendo and Super Nintendo, that's where you played your JRPGs for the most part. Sega was kind of in the background. They had a few good ones, but if you were playing a JRPG,
There's just
you were
so many good games in '96 and '97.
There were
90,
such good years.
Yeah, it was just
the golden age of gaming.
Yeah.
It was one of the most revolutionary times in gaming because people had to be really, really creative, and they came out with a variety of stuff. And you saw so many new franchises. So many people took risks.
Do you remember the fear of 3D gaming in the 90s? There was actually this legitimate fear because, of course, all you got to do was read about the preview of a game from like GamePro or Electronic Gaming Monthly or Nintendo Power, and developers largely had no idea how to make 3D games. So there was a chance you were going to pick up the game and it was just going to be an absolute piece of shit. Unplayable mess like Superman 64. We just didn't know how to make 3D games yet and how to make them control. So every game you picked up played drastically differently, and there was this fear of, oh my god, is it even going to be a playable game back then?
Right.
Which did not exist in
and unlike today, we had to really rely on those reviews. And
right.
Like today, I feel like reviews are a novelty. But back then, I feel like you weren't gonna spend like $50 on a cartridge or a CD just to find out it was garbage.
Exactly.
And your parents,
you couldn't afford to take that risk back then. It wasn't mainstream enough. You were lucky to have maybe up to 5 games a year.
And we didn't have Twitter to go like yell at the company and be like, you screwed this game up and like
fix it, damn it, go give us that.
And there were no patches.
Yeah, the closest I think we had were really like
the game, and it was unplayable. That's permanent.
And then, if we wanted to try it, we had to just hope that our local game store that we could rent it from would actually have it. And if not, I mean, you cannot take the risk.
There was
Blockbuster was about the only way.
At the Game Force, they just had and a PlayStation set up on 3 TVs, and whatever they were playing on the TV, this is how I saw Tomb Raider. Whatever they were playing on the TV was what you got to see playing, and it was usually one of the people that was working that was playing the games. But that's how I found games like Resident Evil. I got to see it played for probably 2 minutes before my parents were fed up with sitting in the store waiting for me to decide for something. So we really didn't get a sample of anything because, I mean, for me, renting was even a novelty.
We had that was the height of demo discs too, though.
For sure.
We don't have that anymore, but back then,
Pizza Hut demo discs.
that was really the only way you could experience it.
If you notice,
I know, seriously, bring back demos.
Yeah, so demo discs.
Yes, demos are gone.
Some games had, you had. If you bought a copy of one game, you could get a demo for another one in it. And in fact, one of the PlayStation versions came with the demo disc for Final Fantasy VII, which is I have the Final Fantasy VII demo disc still in my PlayStation box.
Me too. Yep.
And it's actually really interesting too because some of those demos were nothing like the actual release games.
Right.
Oh yeah, the Final Fantasy VIII demo. I had played Final Fantasy VIII before I played the demo, but I didn't have the game. My cousin had the game, so I got the demo. It was like from Pizza Hut or something, and it came with like 6 different PlayStation games on it.
Did you for doing the reading stuff? Like you did all your reading stuff at school, and you took the reading stuff to Pizza Hut, and then they gave you See, I remember that. Yep, and then it came with a demo disc.
But no, So I remember that stuff too. But the Final Fantasy VIII demo was totally different because you like had Renoa in your party and you already had Leviathan, and I remember just being like, what?
Square did that on purpose. There was actually even different music in the demo. The music was actually copyright striked by Warner Brothers, who was making the movie The Rock. And if you listen to the original demo's music of when he's I call it Dole. I don't know if you guys call it Dollet, the city they smash into. When he smashes into that city,
yeah, I do too.
is different because they got copyright striked by Warner Brothers because the song that Nobuo Uematsu was writing, that you hear in the demo, is so similar to The Rock the movie that came out at the same time as Final Fantasy VIII. So Square actually had to remove the song. But the reason that the demo itself is different is because they didn't want you to play any of the game. They didn't want you to experience any of the actual story that existed.
They wanted you to have an idea of what you were playing rather than the game itself.
What you're going to play. Here's a really great summon animation that destroys anything Final Fantasy VII ever could have showed you. Now go buy the game.
Yes.
All right, so we're going to move on now to now we have back to handheld gaming, believe it or not. So now we've in the late 90s, handheld gaming, it moved to color, so we got a nice upgrade to the Game Boy, and we got the Game Boy Color. Now it's still 8-bit though, so the handheld gaming is still stuck in 8-bit, but now you can play your 8-bit games in color, and you have Pokemon, and that was kind of the start around there, is the start of Pokemon and
Pokemon.
Yeah.
My grandma used to call it that, Pokemans.
Pokemans, yeah, Pokemans.
Yep.
So we have all of that, which is fun, and then Game Boy Colors, I think they started coming out with like 1 billion accessories for them too. You had the attachable lights, magnifying glasses, rechargeable battery packs.
You looked like you had a mini like ensemble of gadgets, just like you're like a spy kid or something.
Oh, it's so true. And you had like your carrying case with like your Game Boy, your cartridges.
I'm so cool, guys.
I'm like, so, yeah, it's like, you might as well have it was a kid's version of a fanny pack. You know, you had the Game Boy case and 500 accessories all in like this little case.
Your connecting cables and your little Game Boy camera.
Your rich suburban cousin looked like a 4-foot-tall Batman. Utility belt and shit.
Oh my god.
Well, then you just go into the Virtual Boy, and that's a whole other mess.
Yeah, we don't talk about the Virtual Boy.
Oh my goodness.
We're not.
We pretend that doesn't exist.
But I really feel Nintendo did really well with with the Game Boy and all of that, and actually like it kind of brought in this whole thing for the 2000s. I'm not gonna talk about this long, but with like the Vita or the PSP. Sorry, PSP was first for Sony. Sony tried to get into that market too, and I felt like Nintendo was the pioneer for that.
Yeah. Sony had trouble with, and we won't.
Yeah, I don't
talk about that, but like
I think they're the only ones that that succeeded in the handheld era because PSP really didn't do very well.
I mean, it sold 70 million units, but it's not good for a PlayStation.
So one of the things,
PSP sold a lot, and I wouldn't consider it not successful, but it wasn't.
Well, I didn't mean like it didn't sell well. I meant more like it just wasn't very like a lot of people didn't really play it.
No, everyone I knew
like I specifically only bought it for Crisis Core, and then I never touched it again.
So one of the reasons the Game Boy did so well in comparison to everything else, whether it's the 90s and the 2000s and whatnot, Nintendo handhelds, is everybody else was so concentrated with like the Game Gear, the Neo Geo in the 90s. They wanted to see if they could take and make that Sega Genesis level experience mobile, and it made the games crap. Nintendo just decided, look, let's make Pokemon. It's not as advanced as what we bring at home, but it brings a whole different social aspect to it. And if you had a Game Boy, you had Pokemon. If you wanted Pokemon, you needed a Game Boy, and that was all there was to it.
Yeah, and the first party support was
even like the Mario games, the Zelda and all that, they were unique experiences created just for the Game Boy to just make sure that it worked on the hardware and it was effective. But if you want to go back, and I'll make the argument, if there was never a Pokemon, I don't think the Game Boy and the handheld market would have ever taken
I'm with you.
I agree 100%. Pokemon is, I think, what caused the handheld market to take off. I mean, Tetris was great. I know Tetris sold a lot, but
they really aimed that at kids though, too.
Yeah, and it was perfect
because
here's the neat thing for parents to invest into a Game Boy is, one, if you had a long cart ride, you tell your kid to shut up, play their Game Boy, and they're happy for 5 hours, or whatever the car ride is. On top of that, it was just an easy way to do it, and the Game Boy, I think by the color, was more affordable at the point.
Yeah,
you could afford more.
I didn't have a Game Boy until the SP, so but like that tells you how young I am. But no,
I had one until the Game Boy Advance, to be honest.
Yeah, I had the square one, the little square one after the Advance. And that thing was a godsend, and I'm so glad that we have Nintendo handhelds and we had the Game Boy Advance, because I have been replaying a lot of GBA games lately, and I think some of them are magnificent, especially for how little the cartridges and all that. They still were engineered perfectly, in my opinion. So
yeah, it was.
The big thing is that, like, especially like how today with mobile games, all the like little mindless puzzle games are the ones that are popular, and I think that's kind of almost in the same vein of what they did with Nintendo and the Game Boy. Is like with Tetris, you can play it, and when you're done, you're done. Like, you don't have to like worry too much about it, and you can just kind of play it mindlessly in the background.
Yeah, it was neat, and then you didn't have to worry about memory cards or anything like that because they were cartridges, so you had your save file on there. So you saved your Pokemon game, you had just your little files built in, and I mean everything worked. It was just this neat thing. You took it everywhere. Parents were happy. Their kids were out of their hair. It made it probably reduced the numbers of "Are we there yet?"
Yeah, for sure.
You know, for that. And the neat part about the accessory was the attachable lights were kind of cheap too. They had these little turtle shell ones that were probably like $15.
That's
That
what
you
I
had
had.
to the side. Yeah, and they were cheaper. Now things were becoming more affordable in terms of handheld gaming, whereas the Game Boy, the original one, was this massive chunk of big technology that they just didn't have stuff for. But by the color, they were like, okay, it's even there. So now you didn't have to worry about waiting for the damn street light to come by, so you could move your character half an inch in Pokemon. You could just play it in the dark, and so
Well, some of them had car adapters too.
yeah, they did. Yes, they did have car adapters. You could buy a there was like a little pack for it that you could stick on the back, a rechargeable pack, and you had like a little power cord for it. You'd stick into the back, and you could stick it into the cigarette lighter thingy in the car. It'd be it was really cool. It was really neat how Nintendo revolutionized, you know, the handheld gaming and really popularized it. I think that's why they still became the gods of handheld gaming over time. Is because they just
and it still shows in their current console.
Yes, which is perfect. And the idea is they were never going to not have Pokemon be portable. So you know, Pokemon moves to primary consoles because you can finally take Pokemon wherever you go with the handheld. And Pokemon was always the bread and butter for the handheld. Every kid was going to go grab the Pokemon game. It was what carried those systems, and then they could publish other Mario games and even Mario Kart versions. And you know, third-party developers would kind of get in on it too because it was neat. Kids were loving it, and you just saw the popularity of it, and you could make all kinds of things with it.
I think you saw a lot of licensed, like Nickelodeon, Disney themed games for especially like the later on you get.
Disney came out with an 8-bit kart racer on the Game Boy Color that I played, and it had like unlockable characters like Jiminy Cricket and Chip and Dale and stuff like. And Jiminy Cricket was like always the hardest computer to race against. He would absolutely demolish people.
So I really hate to interrupt what we're like talking about with the handhelds. I know we're gonna go deeper into that in our later 90s episodes, but we are like slowly running out of time, so I want to move on a little bit.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, so 90s culture is a lot. It's still kind of the same, but it's still like we still had a lot of like bullying and like being an outcast for gaming, and like gamer culture was so different and all of that. So like I know gamers were bullied back then, or we were told, oh, it's so childish, or oh, like it's so bad for you and all of that. So what were some of your experiences with that, like in the 90s? I guess.
Well, as a male, for the most part, you know, besides like the sports players, mostly everybody I hung out with and knew played video games to some degree. Adults definitely did not and didn't understand it. My dad was really obsessed with Tetris and, you know, those types of games, but I did not personally experience a ton of bullying until it came to the console war stuff.
Okay.
And then it was like full on. Yeah, and then it was like full on.
All right, how about Katie or Kayla? What was it like on your end? I know one of the things we're covering.
I'll let Katie go first.
Okay.
She hasn't really talked a lot, though.
I know, and I know women had it worse. I know being a girl and being into video games has been hard, even in modern times. It's difficult. So how bad was it in the '90s trying to do it? I know you guys get too much crap today, but I mean, I'm sure was it worse back then than it is now?
I think it's about the same.
Really?
I think it was worse.
Well, I mean, I started in the 2000s, so I mean, go on, Kate. Sorry.
Oh,
I'm so rude. Go on.
I know with me, I didn't experience at least too much direct bullying that I can remember. But I also hung out with guys much more often than I did girls because just my interests were more aligned with guys anyway.
Yeah.
So I hung out with people that played video games for the most part. And to be honest, like I've always been the weird redheaded girl or whatever. So I don't know if it's just I didn't care as much because by the time I got to high school, like video games have been a part of my interest for as long as I can remember. But by the time I got to high school, I just didn't care about what people thought, and I was an idiot on purpose because it was fun. So if they were saying stuff about me, it was behind my back.
Yeah.
Not straight to my face.
Like with me, I know I had the same thing. I was more friends with guys because of the same, like, everyone was into Pokemon. Like Pokemon was like the big thing, and everyone was into that. But I wasn't into Pokemon as much as everyone else was. I was into more like PlayStation 1 games, like RPGs. And I was like, I think it really determined what kind of games you played, too.
Yeah.
It was like the whole console war thing and all that.
For sure.
Yeah,
well,
like
we had a really weird dynamic, at least like in my specific grade, because I remember like in 4th grade, which was 94, which makes it super easy to remember when I went to school. Like everybody was really, really into like X-Men trading cards. And I mean like even like the quote unquote popular girls were into X-Men trading cards. Yeah, it was really, really strange. So I think that might be another kind of weird
maybe
thing where I didn't
regional.
I'm not trying to be a jerk. Did you grow up in like a different timeline than I did?
Right?
You could have said anything else, and I'm like, okay, that's the X. I didn't even know they had X-Men trading cards.
Pokemon trading cards were like,
yeah, I traded Pokemon cards.
Yeah, Pokemon cards were like our thing.
Yeah, no.
Okay, so I'm older than that. I'm way older than that. Pokemon came out when I was in high school.
Oh shit!
As in middle school.
Yeah, it was Pogs when I was a kid, so like video games were.
Oh my gosh! Yes.
Yeah, we
had.
had.
Kayla, why don't you tell us what it was like? So Katie had apparently lived in a parallel dimension.
Yeah, I think she did.
So Kayla,
it was weird. Like around certain people, I could be very, very open about loving video games and being a gamer and stuff like that. But overall, like in school in general, like I kind of had to keep that to myself because, you know, you'd get teased or I'd get told a lot like, oh, you're only, I mean, it's kind of the same in the sense of like you know, you get told I only play games for the boys' attention. Yeah. Like, no, I'm playing it for Squall's attention, please. Yeah. Like, that's the only boys' attention I want right now.
Squall was
it's still like that today.
You get it.
Yeah, so I mean, it's similar, but it was worse in the sense that it was just like you didn't have other girls to defend you. Like, because we were all kind of, if there were other girl gamers back then in my school and stuff, I really didn't know because none of us were super vocal about it. You got teased if you were a gamer. You were only doing it for the boys. You tell a boy, you know, like, oh, yeah, I freaking love, I don't know, the Pokemon games, Mario, whatever. And then next thing you know, you're on Jeopardy and you have, like, if you don't know
Oh,
every
yep,
single little thing, then
yep.
you're fake gamer girl.
Yeah,
You don't
yep.
know
I
what you're
remember
talking
that.
about.
Like,
And it was really frustrating. So, but then as I got older, I finally got to the point where I was like, you know what, fuck it. I really love video games. If you think I'm a fake, then I mean that's your own issue.
Yeah. who
And now,
cares?
we've got other girls that are like, they openly talk about it. They'll come to your rescue and help you out and be like, no, I love this game too.
Because
like,
people
and it's
still
a
do
lot
it.
more accepted.
People-
They do. It still
people
happens a
still
lot.
do
That's why I
it.
have fake gamer girl in my bio.
Yeah.
Because, like,
So I will say, I guess that kind of opens my eyes to some degree because I didn't know a lot of female gamers, and that's probably because they didn't talk about it.
no.
Yeah,
I'm
see,
really
like you
excited.
look back at it, and
Yeah.
I didn't know
we
many
really
either.
didn't. We kind of kept it to ourselves, and really only like our true friends really knew that we were like gamers, because it's just like it wasn't something girls could really talk about. Especially, I mean, I have like self-esteem issues and stuff, so I never really thought of myself as like conventionally attractive. But a conventionally like attractive person growing up as the girl, if you said you liked video games, oh no, you didn't.
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
Yeah.
It's
That
like
made
how
me
in the
weird.
90s I wasn't allowed to tell anybody else I like Powerpuff Girls.
Yeah,
Powerpuff
like
good,
kind of
okay?
was. It was that
Kind of is,
opposite
yeah.
thing. Like, and
Powerpuff
now,
Girls,
Please.
yes, Powerpuff Girls.
now it's
yes,
like you can like whatever you
That's
want.
okay.
It doesn't matter. But
Yeah,
back then
for
it was
sure.
very boy versus girl.
Oh,
Boys
for
sure.
rule, girls rule, girls rule,
The
boys
level of-
rule.
I mean, we still
Yeah.
experience that today, but not to the degree it was
Not
back then.
yeah, not to the
Not
degree.
to
It was
that
crazy.
It's a
in the
lot more
90s.
shamed these days.
Yeah,
It's not very
Yeah.
acceptable.
becoming more acceptable of that, and it doesn't have to be about boy versus girl.
And a
because
lot of
Right.
guys I've noticed will stick up for, like, not to just simp or whatever. Like, I don't.
Yeah, not like white knight us or anything.
Yeah, they don't white
No.
knight us, but they're like, hey, dude, like, you're being stupid. Like, a lot of guys
Yep.
just don't tolerate it.
Like, just get
Right.
over it, you know.
Yep.
It's the 20. Here's the reality: is it's 2021. This should have never been an issue to begin with. But the
Never
reality
should have, no.
is the idea is interest. Anybody's interest should not be. Nobody should
eco.
be shamed for their interest, and we've promoted this
No.
on this podcast a lot, and we still stand this that everybody should be treated equally. And everybody should be respectful of other people's interests. Nobody is lesser than you for being interested in something, and it doesn't matter what it is.
Now, anime, on the other hand,
Interested in whatever the hell they want,
Yeah.
and it's okay.
Yeah.
Because it's what brings them joy. And let's be honest, because they're into some game that you're not, it's not doing anything to you, but for some reason you're making it
Yeah.
a problem. And what you really need to do
Yeah.
is stop being a dick.
Go play the
And
video game.
Just grow up. I mean, exactly. It's not rocket science, okay? It really isn't, and it does get annoying after
I
a while.
think more so than anything, I know there's obviously 100% some misogynistic thought process behind it for it too, but at the end of the day, it boils down to somebody's own insecurities about their own obsessive
100%.
need for something. Like, if you don't know everything that I know about Final Fantasy VII, it's probably because you're a girl, because if you're a guy, you'd love it as much as I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right,
Exactly.
and they're like, you're only playing it to impress other people.
Yeah.
Like, you're not even paying attention to
Why
what's
you
going
don't
on.
know
Or like,
Cloud's middle
your
name.
older brother played it, and you just watched him or something
Yeah.
like that. I mean, I'm
Even
third
so,
episode
it's always like
of
my brother
Dark
played it. My
X.
brother doesn't even play Final Fantasy. Like, no.
Right.
Let me tell you here.
What is absolutely hilarious about like the whole idea of I'm playing this to impress somebody else. Then why
Yeah.
are you
How
just, like,
stupid is that?
yeah, why are you making fun of me then?
Yeah.
Like, if I'm trying to impress you.
Time to do that.
First of all,
Seriously.
yeah. Who has? By the way, it is kind of hard to dedicate a lot of all of your extra. It's like almost like a gym office prank type thing where you like dedicate a shit ton of your free time to go out of your way to go do something to somebody else.
And honestly, as
I like
gamers,
that. I like that.
as gamers, we all know people who do not play video games and do not understand them. Could you ever in a million years see them picking up a video game to impress some boy or girl? No.
Oh.
If you don't like video games, you're not playing video games.
'Cause
It's like a serious
forever.
dedication.
You have to
Exactly.
It is. It is.
Oh man,
And
all the
here's what I
money.
Here's what I
Yeah,
want to
come
do.
on.
If you're if somebody's hating on what Bill said here is that if you don't know every single thing about Final Fantasy, that I can promise you that she and Kayla, with as much as I've talked to them, could out knowledge anybody in just about any. She with I know Final Fantasy 9 and Tactics for sure. Kayla with Final Fantasy 8. They could both just drop kick you to the ground.
Still taking everybody out.
That you probably wouldn't even know about from your motherfucking basement.
What? You talking shit, Bill?
I said I'm taking out everybody here in Blitzball.
Oh, no. Oh, Kayla, speaking of, I know it's a tangent real quick, and I think it's a good way to end, because I think it's funny. Kayla,
Well, don't forget our question, too.
Kayla was thinking about this great idea for a Final Fantasy game where it's all the mini games, and you can play them against people. Like,
yeah, wouldn't that be
a really good
online
idea.
gold
I
saucer.
will not play Blitzball. I will not play Blitzball.
I will teach you to play Blitzball.
Okay,
we need a whole episode dedicated to how messed up that Square Enix made a multiplayer version of Triple Triad, and it's paywall locked to 3 games a game. 3 games a game. Look it up. There's an app on your phone called Final Fantasy.
I played it, and it's stupid.
It's awesome.
I hate it.
It's awesome, but you can only play 3 times a day unless you give them $10 for coins.
Yeah.
That's
Come on, dude.
That's some
No, I just want like all the mini games. And not what they have on Final Fantasy 14, because I don't want to go play an MMORPG to get to it. I just want like a standalone, just mini games, like a party game that you can play like local co-op or like online co-op.
You ruin all your friendships.
Blitzball.
I mean,
and then Bill and I
can
can beat each other in the face with Blitzballs.
I mean, that's literally what it would be, though. It would literally be the Mario Party of Final Fantasy. Everybody would get together, and you all wouldn't be friends by the end of the movie.
But I'm so glad we.
There's so many things Square should do with Final Fantasy that they have not done yet.
Oh, they have so much they can expand into. I love
so
Square,
frustrated.
but they're huge cash cows, and you would
They're
think that they would take
terrible.
advantage of this.
Yeah,
Yes.
we will have a separate conversation about that another time.
did
I know we're
try,
wrapping up, but
had that mobile
let's
game.
move on to our last question, so we don't lose our time. So, all right. So everybody's go around. So, what was your first game on a '90s system? So we'll go ahead and start with Matt, and tell us what your first game was. Just give us a really short synopsis of the game and how you liked it.
Well, I mean, my first game on a '90s console was Super Mario Bros., the original Super Mario Brothers.
Okay.
Because the Nintendo came out in the 90s for me, because I'm in the United States. So when it dropped in 1990, I had already played Mario Bros., which was the same game in the arcade. But to play it at home with basically exactly the same there was nothing like it. Nothing in the world.
All right, awesome. And Chi, go ahead and what was your first 90s game?
So the first one I actually played, I think, does it have to be a 90s game?
It does have to be a 90s game.
Yes.
Ah, damn it. So I played, the first game I played that's on a 90s console was Final Fantasy 9, but that game came out in 2000, so I can't say it. So I want to say the first game after that was Spyro Year of the Dragon? Which was,
Heck yeah.
Yeah, you can see my age. I was born in 93, so.
Look, I like to consider at least up until 2004 to be the late 90s, personally.
Everyone,
No.
You can hear me rant about
No, we're not going to get into that debate. All right, Katie, go ahead and state your game. I'm going to cut that argument off right now. All right, Katie, go ahead and.
Shit.
Yeah, cut that, Katie. What was your first 90s game?
My first 90s game, if it was probably Super Mario Brothers then, with it coming out.
Okay. Awesome. So we got 2 Super Mario Bros. All right, now Kayla, what was yours?
What was Bill's?
Oh, Bill.
Mine?
Oh, God.
Are we doing me or Bill?
I didn't skip him. Everybody's still on here.
Okay, Kayla, you go first.
Okay. So mine was Sonic 2. It was pretty much the first game I ever played. I was 5 years old. I feel like I have probably played other games, but my mom came home with the Sega and Sonic 2, and it was for her. She bought it for herself, and I remember watching her play, and then I kicked her off for like ever, and then I was on it all the time.
Nice.
And it was over. That's what made me become a gamer, and everything was just, I sat down and I never stopped.
There you go. All right, now
Sucks,
Bill,
yeah.
we'll get you saving the best guess for last.
All right. So
Oh wow.
the earliest
I'm kidding, Katie.
That's
I'm
shade.
the earliest thing I can remember having, because I've had video games since before I was born. I inherited the consoles from my parents. Is I remember living in that house in East Boston with like pretty much my whole family and playing Super Mario World. And the funniest, most enjoyable part of Super Mario World is watching two grown adults, my dad and my mom's sister, my aunt,
Actually,
vicariously fight and talk trash to a 4-year-old about each other, about the exits and secrets they found in Super Mario World, in an attempt to prove to that 4-year-old that they were the best Super Mario World
So,
player.
I want-
And still to this day, it's amazing.
I want to take back
Awesome.
my answer. I did play Duck Hunt. I don't know if that was 90s.
That is a 1990s game in the
Yes,
United
I did
States.
play
It
Duck
is.
Hunt when I was like 4.
Okay, so there you go. You got
Counts.
it.
Counts.
All
I
right.
hate Duck Hunt.
I do too.
I
but
hate the dog.
Yeah, I know. It's
I hate the
That
dog.
The
dog.
guy
I
is
could
so
never
loud.
like. I cry when you kill animals and things like that in games, and I used
I
to
remember
point that
the
gun at that
horse
dog
too.
every time it
Dog.
laughed at
Yep.
me.
Try to kill that stupid dog.
Who didn't
Hate
point
that
the gun
dog.
at
And now he's a
dog?
Smash Brothers character.
It makes me feel better to know that everybody's done it.
Everybody
That's
hated
bottom
that
tier.
stupid
Everybody
dog.
hates the dog. Yep.
That's why we have esteem issues. Because that stupid dog laughed at us.
It's true.
Yeah.
The dog was the original bully. Anyway, so mine was, believe it or not, is here's your third Super Mario Bros. I first played Super Mario Bros. On the original Nintendo back in when I started gaming. I was almost 3, so I was like 96. So in '96,
Mhm.
I was playing the original Super Mario on the original Nintendo.
Oh,
So,
that makes me feel.
That was
Wow.
me.
Me too.
So I think we had a really good episode. I know we had a lot.
So, all right. Well, that. We'd like to congratulate our new hosts, Matt and
Thank
Kayla.
you.
Thank you very much for
Thank you.
being a part of. Yeah, we're honored to have you. We're looking forward
Guys,
to.
I'm sorry, but my
Love it.
computer did the thing again. So you're gonna have to repeat what you said.
Okay, I'll repeat it. Anyway, all right. So that's all I was gonna say. So that's all the time we have today for our '90s episode. I'd like to thank Kayla and Matt.
Thank you.
Congratulate them again for being
Of course.
co-hosts with us again. We're really looking forward to
I'm
doing
so
our future
excited.
episodes with you. You guys have been great. We love you, and I think you guys are here to take us to the next level. Katie and Bill, we're really happy to have you on as guests today. By the way, you're both phenomenal, and we're hoping we will have you back again if you're interested.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'll try to talk more.
It's okay.
Okay.
I talk too
Okay.
much.
It's
so you just have
scary
to say,
your first
"Shh,
time."
Shut up.
Yeah.
You just gotta barge your way through these guys
Yeah.
and just say, "Hey, it's my turn to talk."
Yeah.
Power slide
True.
back to me.
Don't be afraid.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to bitch slap Kayla, Chi, and Matt. It's okay.
Yeah. You have
Hey.
full permission to tell me to shut up and smack me.
So anyway, well, we're really grateful. And remember, if you enjoyed the content today, please remember to follow the Gaming United podcast at GU_podcast.
Twitter. And I will
On
post
Twitter.
everyone's info in the YouTube description, and I will post everybody's information on Twitter. So if you want to
Yeah.
figure out who we are, come follow us on Twitter. We're all obnoxious and weird and talk about random things. So
It's true. Some of us shitpost, some of us smell games, some of us draw, some of us do a variety.
Some of us dance
Some
to
of us-
PlayStation reveals.
That's true. Some of them do dance. Some of them cry.
Some
All of us cry. Let's be honest. All of
All
us.
of us cry.
All
I'm
of
gonna
us
say,
cry.
oh, is that directed at me?
No,
that's
I mean,
not
you
what
should have
I
seen.
mean.
My nieces were laughing over my crying, like I'm bawling at the Horizon 2 reveal. And I'm, 77 years old or something, so it never ends.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, I'll and then finally, some of us cuddle many kittens at the same time. So that's
yeah.
the one that's directed at Kayla.
Don't forget about me. I
Alright,
sexually
that's good.
harassed celebrities on Twitter. So
Oh, okay. Yes, Bill has sexually harassed celebrities on Twitter. So if you enjoy that kind of content, he's right up your alley.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for having us today. And I'm sorry about the blips in some of the parts of this episode. I don't know. I think it's because me and Cthulhu are on at the same time. And yeah. So see you next time, everybody.